Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to my spoiler-heavy review of Star Wars Rogue One, a Star Wars story? Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to my review of Star Wars... Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to my review of Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So today I'm going to be doing a spoiler-heavy review of Rogue One. If you haven't seen this film yet, then please go out and see it, and then come back and watch this review because this is going to be a spoiler-heavy video. Okay, so to say that I had high expectations going into this film would be a massive understatement. I think this wasn't just an extremely important film for Star Wars fans, it was also an extremely important film for Disney and the Star Wars franchise itself. So with Force Awakens doing so well in the box office last year, Disney answered the question as to whether it could successfully revitalize these Star Wars trilogy films, and this year Disney had to answer an even more important question, and that was, can Star Wars be a cinematic universe the way Marvel is? Can we have anthology films outside of the main trilogy films? After seeing Rogue One, I do have an answer to this question, but we'll get to that. So firstly, I want to dive right in and just talk about the film itself, because my god, did I leave the theatre feeling shocked. So, let's start with the things that I liked and thought really worked. The CGI in this film is breathtaking. Save for two CG characters, which I'll get to, but I'm talking class-leading CG in this movie. The battle sequences are very well executed and the cinematography is gritty and visceral. I'll even go so far as to say that the space battle scene at the end of this film is possibly second only to the space battle scene at the end of Jedi. The two scenes with Darth Vader worked. The accent from James Earl Jones was a little weird, and the one scene, where he talks, it felt a little bit kind of African Lion King James Earl Jones, but overall they both worked and they really brought us back to the villain that we all know and love so much. I also really liked the sets and practical effects in this film. There are some truly incredible set pieces and structures. The sets felt used, they felt worn and lived in, and it all felt very Star Wars. All of the prosthetic and alien characters in this film, they looked amazing, and there were some familiar faces as well as some welcome new additions to the vast array of alien characters that we now have as canon in the Star Wars CU. There are also some really interesting themes of morality within the Rebellion, which were brought up, and they painted the Rebel Alliance in a slightly more morally grey light than we've come to expect from the good guys. I thought this was refreshing and realistic, and it was a good take on the Rebellion, and it certainly added to the darker, more realistic tone that Gareth Edwards was trying to go for with this film. The film also expands on the Empire very nicely, giving us a glimpse at the extent of their occupation and influence over the galaxy. It's a great look at what it's also like for a planet under Imperial occupation at this period. So all of these scenes were, beautiful to behold on screen. Also, the cinematography. There are some really creative shots and camera angles which also felt extremely refreshing in a Star Wars film. This movie also addresses a major plot hole that fans have squabbled over for years, and that is, why would the Empire build a weapon so vast and so powerful with such a major weakness embedded in its design?
No weaknesses at all, huh?
No.
You hesitated there. Is there something I should know?
No, it's virtually indestructible, like 99.99%.
Okay, wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask what's the .01.
Well, I mean, there's this little hole. It was kind of an aesthetic choice by the architect, and if you shoot a laser into this hole, the station blows up.
Whoa, that sounds like a pretty big design flaw there.
This was put to rest beautifully with Mads Mikkelsen's character Galen also explaining that he built in a shaft to the main reactor that could be destroyed if hit with an explosive. I felt this now improves A New Hope, and it ties in seamlessly to that movie. The performances by the main characters Felicity Jones and Diego Luna are great given what they had to work with, and we'll get to that as well. The supporting characters Jien Wen, Donnie Yen, Mads Mikkelsen and Alan Tudyk are also well acted. Alan Tudyk's character K2SO was witty and broke up the action sequence as well. K2 is an extremely likable droid, and he is a great addition to the Star Wars CU. In terms of positives, it really ends there. So let's get right into the main reason I'm doing this review, and that is to basically talk about and explain why I felt extremely disappointed leaving this film, and why I feel like it leaves me nervous for the other anthology films coming out in 2018 and 2020. Let's start with the editing and construction of the first act. As soon as the film starts, there are problems. The lack of the opening crawl was a huge mistake in my opinion. Not because the cold open didn't work, but because it felt incredibly jarring when the title text Rogue One came in after the opening scene, and also because jumping around was so necessary in the first act to set up the story and plot. A lot of the jarring edits and jumping around could have been simplified, spared, aided by the inclusion of an opening crawl text, and it really would have reduced the amount of exposition throughout the movie. This was a huge risk on the part of Gareth Edwards, and personally I think it was a bit of a fail. In the first act, there are jumps to several planets in very quick succession. Even if they kept everything the same and simply changed the edits to stay with each storyline for 2 cuts worth of material before moving to a different location, it would have helped. But overall, the jumping around to the different locations felt very jarring, felt very rushed, and it took me right out of the movie. There was also sometimes the inclusion of a planet name in white text and then sometimes not, and it felt very inconsistent. I would have personally preferred it to be a little more often rather than less in the first act. The location jumping, it made it hard to follow plot points and invest in the story because you felt like you were playing catch up on the first viewing. Now to the characters. The characters in this film are lacking backstory. They're lacking depth and development. In terms of characters, this film fails in all the ways where an expanded universe film such as Fantastic Beasts succeeded. Starting with the protagonist, Jyn Erso. The first time you see grown-up Jyn, she's in a prison, she's being broken out and taken immediately into the plot. We're not given any time with her to learn about what drives her and come to like and empathize with her. There's no detailed sequence as we had with Rey in Force Awakens or Luke on Tatooine. She's literally thrown on screen and absorbed straight into the plot, and her being broken out and moved from prison, and I feel like this is a rookie level mistake in the script. The reason we care about Luke and Rey's protagonists in the other Star Wars films is because we're given time to learn about them on screen. And this is why I saw the performance as good, but I kind of leave it there. Felicity Jones is good in the film, make no mistake, she's a great casting choice for this character, but she's not given enough of a backstory and enough development in the first act to care when things start happening to her in the second and third act. Case in point, the scene where the Death Star is used to blow up Jedha and she's listening to a recorded message from her father. This scene is suitably emotional and it wants to target your heartstrings with the right tone and the right musical cues. But Felicity's performance here, she doesn't really have anything to work with, and you don't really empathize with her character emotionally because you haven't been given enough of her to care about her yet. So you're not invested in her character by the time the scene hits, and it loses all its emotional poignancy. To finish up on Jyn's character, there is an arc which is alluded to through a pretty exposition heavy scene with Forrest Whitaker's character, Saw Gerrera, but it's not really touched on again after that, and it was a real missed opportunity. The idea of the scene with Forrest presents a character who is herself a bit of a free agent and doesn't really have any allegiance to anyone or anything.
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel.
It's a very quick and abrupt transition from Jyn being anti-establishment, anti-rebellion, anti-empire, to suddenly picking a side and deciding to not only join, but to lead a mission of her own and become a hero of the rebellion. Moving on to the supporting lead, played by Diego Luna. Diego does a good job here, and again, the shortcomings of this character are not Diego's fault. The script and screenplay fail to give him any notable backstory or discernible character arc. He largely feels like a very bland and disposable supporting actor. Diego basically remains the same bland rebel soldier he was at the start of the film, and this is extremely disappointing given that the film clocks in at a little over 2 hours. As for the other characters in the team, Donnie Yen and Jiang Wen, Riz Ahmed are all introduced pretty quickly and in a very jumpy fashion. These characters suffer the same shortcomings of the two leads. They are given no backstory and quickly rushed into the plot without being given any screen time to show us a little of who they are and what they stand for. Yes, of course, this could have also been done during the plot. You could find out more about them and they could have been fleshed out along the way, but they weren't. This film was surely not easy to pull off, and I have no doubt that Gareth Edwards and screenwriters Chris Weitz and Tony Gilroy, the whole production team, they had their set of challenges introducing this many new characters in one film and fleshing them out. But it's not an impossible task. Surely the first thing you would do is to look at a few films that had the same task of introducing this many characters in one movie and that did it well. Instantly coming to mind is Guardians of the Galaxy. And just to name a few others that successfully do this, there's Fellowship of the Ring, Harry Potter 1, Fifth Element, Inglourious Basterds, Inception, Mission Impossible. Moving on to Krennic. I felt Krennic had the potential to be a menacing villain in this film, but again, he was ultimately not given enough to do, not given enough depth to make him menacing. The inclusion of Admiral Tarkin, a more high-ranking general who was one of the CG characters, was a huge mistake and only served to weaken Krennic's presence and sense of threat in this film. The scenes with CG Tarkin were exposition heavy, they weren't really integral to the plot. The film operates in a time period where we have Darth Vader, so why not have him be the overbearing villain and Krennic the secondary villain with no Admiral Tarkin? Or have Vader in the same two scenes but only have Admiral Tarkin briefly at the end after Krennic is dead? Alternatively, you could have Tarkin just sort of looming in the background with his face covered in shadow and little or no dialogue, and he's just kind of creepily observing Krennic through the whole movie, watching his mistakes, plotting, waiting for the ideal time to seize power. Ultimately, this film could have worked with a little bit more Vader and Krennic. Vader and his physical presence would have been very welcome in a few more scenes. Krennic would have been more threatening with no Tarkin and a little more to do. So basically, with such a huge budget, pool of talent in the cast and production team, it's amazing that no one noticed that these characters were bland and two-dimensional. Or that someone maybe did notice and brought it up, but that the observation fell on deaf ears. Have we learned nothing from the prequels? Surely 3 bad prequel movies with horrible dialogue and two-dimensional characters is enough to learn what doesn't work in a Star Wars film. But hey, apparently not. I think that it's highly likely that the characters were more fleshed out before the reshoots. And looking at the first trailer, most of that footage and dialogue is not in the cinematic version. It shows Mon Mothma asking Jyn to go on a mission, and she's treated more like an accepted soldier who's been welcomed into the ranks of the rebellion with clear purpose.
Can you be trusted without your shackles?
Let's just get this over with, shall we?
We've a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know how to destroy it.
If you're really doing this, I want to help.
Good.
Good.
One trailer shows what looks like Jyn and K2's character meeting for the first time on Jedha. I mean, what does that tell you about how different the first cut of this movie was going to be?
The captain says you are a friend. I will not kill you.
Thanks.
Another trailer features a line of dialogue from Jing Wen's character talking about how the Empire destroyed his home and why he fights.
We destroyed our home. I fight the Empire now.
This is the sort of stuff, this is the sort of backstory that the film was completely missing. And I think it could well have been in the original version, the original cut. So I want to quickly talk about the dialogue in this movie. This goes hand in hand with the character shortcomings. So most of the dialogue between the characters in this film is plot related. Characters talk to each other about what they have to do or where they have to go next and how they have to achieve something related to the plot. Sometimes the characters talk about things that have already happened in the plot. What the dialogue is missing are moments where the characters talk about non-plot related things to each other. Things that have happened to them or the reasons why they've made the choices they have. We never learn why Jyn was in prison. We never learn why Bodhi Rook defects from the Empire and helps Galen. We never learn why Donnie Yen and Jen Wing's character become friends by the end. Some non-plot related dialogue throughout the second act might have made us understand, but no, it wasn't there. Also, the romance between Jin and Cassian could have used some non-plot related dialogue. It might seem like an obvious one, but it's really necessary to develop a set of characters like this. And throughout the other Star Wars films, there tends to be a sort of show rather than tell attitude towards the dialogue. And in Rogue One, unfortunately, it's very exposition heavy. To illustrate this point, let's quickly look at this scene from Fellowship of the Ring, where Boromir and Aragorn meet. The characters discuss the history of Shards of Narsil, the sword, and Boromir drops the sword while Aragorn picks it up respectfully and returns it to its resting place. It's something simple, but this scene foreshadows the tension between these characters, which builds throughout the film and eventually climaxes by the third act.
You a no elf?
The men of the South are welcome here.
Who are you?
Of the Grey.
We are here on common purpose. Friend? Shards of Narsil. Blade that cut the ring. Sauron's hand. Still sharp. No more than a broken head.
Okay, let's talk about musical score in this film. This is a big one for me. There were many key emotional moments which needed more support from the score and needed the score to be more emotionally engaging, and it consistently failed to deliver. The thing that's so frustrating is the music has largely already been written. There were so many missed moments where the music from the original trilogy could have been utilised, and it wasn't. The story was about the Empire and showed us the Empire at a time when it was at its peak, politically and occupationally. Where was the Imperial March theme? Even the trailers featured more musical cues from the original than the finished movie did.
State your name for the record.
Jyn Erso.
What will you become?
The main theme of the rebellion could have been played under the huge epic star battle at the end, and it would have given the scene so much more weight and so much more urgency and payoff. Where I really missed the score the most was when the main side characters started dying like flies in the third act. The execution when Donnie Yen's character sacrificed himself to push the broadcast lever. These moments were lacking heavily in support from the musical score. You can have Star Wars films without John Williams doing the score, but use the material that he's already crafted where it's blatantly appropriate. And if you're wanting to make new music that makes the films stand alone and be different to the trilogy, then bring someone on who is able to craft and construct new, memorable themes if you can't book Williams. Where the hell was Howard Shore or James Newton Howard? They could have helmed this soundtrack, and the lack of any memorable themes made these scenes fall flat, and is a large reason why this film couldn't reach the heights of the original trilogy or even Force Awakens for that matter. I just want to touch on a few little bits and pieces now that also really stood out and didn't work in my opinion. So the two CG characters. The first is the Imperial Admiral from A New Hope, Tarkin. Obviously they couldn't use the original actor, so they chose to do a CGI motion capture and replicate his face. This was extremely off-putting, and it distracted me and plucked me right out of the movie in the midst of a first act that was already suffering enough from the other problems. I play a fair few video games and I know what a human face looks like, and I noticed immediately, and it felt like I was sitting back in the prequels. Honestly, the CG on this character was inexcusably bad. I can instantly think of an actor who quite looks like the original Admiral who could have been cast in this movie rather than doing CG. What about Charles Dance, who plays Tywin Lannister in Thrones? I mean, just to name one, God, he would have been much better than a CG Admiral. But the real question was, why was he even in the film at all? The Admiral detracts from Krennic's presence and his threat and doesn't offer anything too integral to the plot. It was a very disappointing choice to leave him in. Then there was Leia's face, which was equally bad and shouldn't have been in the film. The only reason they had Leia in the film was to create a nice tie-in to A New Hope with her saying the cheesy line, "The message is hope," at the end of the film. Really, this was also terrible, inexcusably bad. Just have her cloaked, receiving the plans without turning around, and have a door closing in front of her and take us to black. The CG face was very unconvincing and, most importantly, very unnecessary. That's the big point here. It wasn't necessary to create the challenge of building a human face using CG and trying to get it to look perfectly like Carrie Fisher's face. Because in the end, we did not need to see Leia's face and have her say that cheesy line at the end of the film. We'd already wrapped up a very satisfying battle sequence with a nice little cherry on top with Darth Vader's fight scene. The inclusion of Leia's CG face was something in this film I truly hated. Okay, so the third act has largely been left untouched upon in this review, but I also feel it has a few problems despite it being a satisfying conclusion to the film. The final encounter between Jyn and Krennic is very anticlimactic, and it's also extremely predictable writing, with Cassian coming in and shooting Krennic and saving Jyn. So, to tie into the start of the review now, I said the question was, does this film prove that Star Wars can have an expanded universe and work the way Marvel works? After seeing this film, surprisingly, I can say yes. This is a very sloppy film with some very poor choices that were made on nearly every level of the film, whether it be the characters or lack of them in places, the editing, the musical score, all the finer details. And just to be clear, I'm not some Star Wars purist who holds up the originals or Force Awakens as flawless masterpieces. I've got plenty of problems with Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, but even those two films, which are great Star Wars movies with problems, even they far outshine Rogue One in my opinion. I think for me this film sits in between the prequel films and the original trilogy. I would rank them probably Empire, New Hope, Force Awakens, Return of the Jedi, then Rogue One, and then the disposable prequel movies. This film is still a lot better than the prequel movies, but that's kind of meaningless at this point. In fact, despite all the shortcomings of the prequels, I did care about the characters in the third prequel movie. I was heartbroken when Obi-Wan leaves Anakin and defeats him in Episode 3, whereas I wasn't heartbroken when Galen also dies, nor was I when the other characters did. And for a Star Wars movie, not caring when main characters start dying is not a good sign. Right now, I would probably score this film a 60% out of 100. It's a must-see, of course, but my god, what a profound disappointment, given the amount of infrastructure and love behind it. I think the initial reviews of this film have been very deceptive and ignorant of clear flaws in the movie, and I'd like to see more people opening up and speaking their mind about this film, because unless people voice their concerns with this film, then Disney is going to see this as a success and could potentially shit the bed again with the Han Solo movie or the Boba Fett movie. They shouldn't get a free pass on this one. They shouldn't get to just serve us up this meal and go away thinking that it's well cooked because many Star Wars fans ate it up. I'm a Star Wars fan, and I love Star Wars and grew up with it, and I'm not happy with the meal I was served. This is a very mediocre Star Wars film in my opinion, but it still lights up my imagination, and it still shows me that standalone Star Wars films have the potential to work in a Star Wars CU. And this is the big point that I want to make now about this film proving a Star Wars CU can work. The fact that Star Wars is becoming a CU now is really the best thing that could have happened to Star Wars, because there are practically endless chances now to get it right. So even if Rogue One ultimately failed to live up to my expectations or be the Star Wars film I wanted it to be, there are many more stories and chances for directors and producers of Star Wars films to get it right and to completely blow fans away with their work. So if you see this film and agree with some of the things that I've brought up, just remember it's okay to be a hardcore Star Wars fan. It's okay to have high expectations from a film like this, and it's also okay to be disappointed. It's okay to discuss it with people. Because if no one gives any feedback when something's bad, then how can we demand that the next one be better, or the next one improve on some of the flaws that are clearly in Rogue One? In the meantime, let's just hope they release a director's cut, because I think that will solve, or could potentially solve, a lot of the problems with the current version that we've gotten in cinemas. Thanks for listening to this somewhat lengthy rant. Leave your comments below and do go see this movie, because despite everything, there is so much to enjoy here. Thanks guys.